Yeah, so we want to deal with someone who's autistic. They're a Christian. They're part of a church. They obviously bring things to the table in their interpersonal relationships that are unusual in certain ways to the people around them. And questions that can come up on that is the feeling the person has of not being treated like a real person. Being treated as in some way abnormal or defective, or nobody quite knows what to say, or even in some extreme cases, someone might even interpret that is it demonic that this person struggles with these kinds of problems. And I'd like to start in on thinking about this question by making it as one example of a much bigger issue. There's a sense that what this person is talking about is something that in different ways anyone who sticks out from the crowd is going to experience. My father-in-law almost died of polio in the last polio epidemic in the 1950s, and he was left paralyzed from the waist down, so he had crutches, and then late in his life had to be in a wheelchair. And that's one of those things that every single person who ever meets you or sees you from afar, the very first thing they notice about you is the way you stick out from the norm. And so it could be, autism can create those kinds of reactions. A physical handicap of some sort, like my father-in-law had. And even, I think this is a refreshing thing to put in there, if someone who is extraordinarily rich is always dealing with this. People treat an extraordinarily rich person, or a famous athlete, or someone who is just unusually beautiful in a way that they're a freak. They're an oddball. People are awkward around them, or people are fearful, or they feel inferior, or they want to get some dirt on them, or there's something about anybody that sticks out from the crowd that other people are tempted to some very typical kinds of human reactions that do not reflect the grace and glory of God. People can be tempted to fear of the unusual, fear of the abnormal, fear of something different that they've never experienced. They can be tempted to suspicion. They can be tempted to have some kind of wacky idea like that a demon would cause these things, which I'll say right off the bat is simply lunacy. It says nothing about the autistic person and everything about the person who's thinking that that's what's going on. They can be tempted to just simply be awkward when they're around someone who is perhaps so different from how they are, so different from the norm. In fact, this can come up in its own way if you are a white person in a predominantly black community, or a black person in a predominantly white community, or run that any other type of ethnic or racial difference. So you're dealing with the issue of human differences. And human differences are something that the God who made people and made them different has a lot to say about human differences. He made it so. It's interesting, even in the Bible, although particular things like autism or polio are not mentioned, but there's a discussion, for example, a very interesting discussion between Moses and God in the beginning of Exodus, where Moses apparently had some kind of speech defect. And, was he a stutterer? Did he have a lisp? Those are other things that are immediately, people are going to notice that every time you open your mouth. And Moses apparently had some kind of defect, and quote unquote defect. And God says to him that I, the Lord, make the mouth and the ears and the eyes, and he makes us. And he makes us with differences. And I think in the way that God runs his world, those differences, whether they are in physical capability, intellectual ability, wealth, beautiful, ugly, black, white, something in the middle. They are there as a living test for all of us of whether we're going to get first things first. Because those sorts of differences simply exist within the context of God's creational wisdom. And what they test is whether we are going to approach those differences as things that are cause for humility, for learning from each other, for perhaps forbearing with each other. Someone who has a speech defect is going to have difficulty, say, getting the full thought out, and are those who are with them going to have just the simple patience and courtesy to hang in there for a person that's going to take a little bit longer to get something out? So that category of human differences is one of the things that I think that this person who is self-described as somewhere in the autism, sort of autism to Asperger's spectrum is a bunch of things that have gotten a lot of attention in our culture lately, and good attention. It's a difference. It's a human difference that that others need to learn to love and to live with. What about the fact that one is not treated as a normal person? That awkwardness or suspicion or people keeping their distance? Or what about the fact that people don't necessarily know how to interact or how to help? And let me use my father-in-law as an example in this. He knew that he was an immediate object of attention because he was walked with crutches. And he would be the first one to talk about it. And I think in speaking to this autistic person, that to not yourself be ashamed of what is there, but to break the ice with people, to throw it open that, I have certain characteristics that can make it, and what are those particulars for this person that make them a little bit socially awkward or make them do certain behaviors that others might find confusing. Just put it on the table and say to people, I might do these things, but let me tell you then who I really am as a person. Because as people, we all face the same human struggles. We're all tempted we can get discouraged, or we can be anxious, or we can get irritated, or we can be selfish, or we can be loving. And loving and faithful is going to take different forms with different abilities, but it's something that if the quote-unquote disabled person takes the lead, you yourself, you might say, normalize the abnormal for other people, and you're actually serving them by helping them understand an aspect of God's spectrum of differences that they may simply have not been familiar with before. It's been so interesting now being married to Nan for coming on 33 years, and she, from the time I've known her, has always been completely comfortable with any kind of human oddity. Whether it's an elderly person that loses her train of thought, or whether it's her dad who had polio, or whether it's a young child that is retarded or has a cleft palate, or why is she comfortable with people that are sort of not the normal? And it's because she learned early on, living with her own father, seeing the way that he approached it, and she learned that he's a person and you love him, and there's some things you have to do to help him that you don't necessarily have to help other people with. And so I see that as a way in which the person with autism can really see part of their ministry in a church is to help people understand something they may not otherwise understand.